Hello, I'm Jorge Gestoso. Welcome to a new program. Who won the most between President Trump and President Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, the meeting that they have at the White House between Mexico and the United States? We ask our guest, Manuel Pérez Rocha, Associate Fellow at the IPS, the Institute for Policy Studies. Manuel Pérez Rocha, a warm welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Jorge.
Manuel, how do you assess that meeting between President Lopez Obrador and President Trump regarding the beginning of the new free trade agreement called the US-NBC in the US?
I think, Jorge, that it was really unnecessary for President Lopez Obrador and his team to come all the way to Washington. It was evident from Trudeau's, the Prime Minister of Canada's, non-participation also that this was an unnecessary meeting. And moreover, in times of COVID, it was a huge task to mobilize so many people, in particular in commercial planes, taking risks, unnecessary risks. And in general, I think that, the inauguration of the USMCA would have been at a distance. So that's my first assessment. It was unnecessary, and it proved very risky for President Lopez Obrador.
President Lopez Obrador, after the meeting, at closed doors, there was a press conference with President Trump, and he said, and I quote his words, he said to Donald Trump, "You never tried to impose anything that violates our sovereignty. You didn't try to use us as a colony, quite the contrary. You have honored our condition of an independent nation." Is that true?
Well, I think if we read the fine print of the new USMCA, we can see that the new trade pact has some improvements, but it remains a handout to large corporations. This is particularly evident in the rules related to investor rights. One of the most controversial aspects of NAFTA was that it allowed private corporations to sue governments in supranational tribunals, like here in Washington, like the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes. This faculty that gives, it's called Investor State Dispute Settlement, this ISDS, as it's known for its acronym, it remains in the USMCA, but it remains only between Mexico and the US. The US and Canada eliminated it because the recognition that it affects the sovereign capacity of governments to dictate their own political and environmental policies. But unfortunately, it remains with Mexico. With the new USMCA, there's three distinct investment protection regimes in North America. First, as I said, a system for the United States and Canada, in which ISDS no longer exists, it's eliminated. A second, a system for Mexico and the US, in which ISDS persists, and Mexico will remain subject to large corporations, particularly oil corporations, gas corporations, and many others, being able to sue Mexico for millions and sometimes thousands of millions of dollars in supranational tribunals. Mexico is already being sued by two US mining companies under NAFTA for more than $3,000 million. That's a huge amount of money that should be better spent to alleviate the impacts of the pandemic in Mexico. However, in the negotiations of the new trade agreement, Mexico surrendered again its sovereignty, not forcing again also the elimination of these provisions between Mexico and the US. And there's a third system between Canada and Mexico under the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, by which is largely based on NAFTA's pre-existing Chapter 11 on investment, and which will continue allowing Canadian companies also suing Mexico, in particularly mining companies. There's also a big threat from a Canadian mining company on Mexico. Of course, this is bilateral, but Mexico does not have the huge investments in oil, in gas, in mining that Canada and the US have in Mexico. No?
What would you say that is the biggest difference between the previous free trade agreement and this new one?
The biggest difference, well, the main change between the USMCA and the NAFTA is that the USMCA replaces the local content requirement for cars manufactured in the region. That is, the local content has to increase from 72.5% to 75%. That means that more products that are built into a car, that are used for a car, have to come from the North American region. That is, much less products are allowed now to come from other countries, for example, China. So it is the main difference is that there's more protection for the local industry. However, there's also changes that will force several of the components of cars to be built in areas where the salary is at least $16 per hour. So this will also affect Mexico, because Mexico will not have that high level of salaries, and there might be difficulties in retaining certain automobile and manufacturing industries in Mexico. Well, other changes and positive changes have to do with improved labor standards that are being improved as we speak in Mexico. But this was also a policy of Lopez Obrador's government from the beginning, to improve labor standards in Mexico, to increase salaries, and this is something that is progressing. So this is a beneficial thing of the new free trade agreement. But the changes are quite minimal. I mean, not minimal, but 90% of the new agreement is just translated from the previous one. So it's not such a transformation as Donald Trump would brag about. It's basically the same agreement. It has the same objectives, the same, much of the same chapters, with a different structure to make it look as radically different, but it isn't.
Why do you think that after that meeting and after that press conference, that day here at the White House ended up with dinner in honor of President Lopez Obrador that was attended by a group of the high-level businessmen from Mexico and high-level businessmen of the U.S., and there were not present in the meeting anyone representative of the workers of either countries, or in the case of environmental people who defend our situation?
Well, this is a perfect showcase of what these agreements are about, of what these free trade agreements are about. Since the very beginning, since their conception and through their negotiation, only the big businessmen participate, and the negotiations are dictated by the interests of large businessmen. So when you ask the question of who won with this meeting between Lopez Obrador and Donald Trump, which country won, I wouldn't pose it as which country. It's not a matter of which country loses or which country wins, but which sectors win and which sectors of society lose. And it was very clear that the big businessmen of Mexico, including Carlos Slim, which is the richest man in Latin America, are the winners of these, are the winners, as well as the U.S. business people, of these new trade agreements. And the losers are, as always, well, in the bottom of the scale, the migrants that weren't, migration was not even an issue during the meeting of the presidents. It was an issue that was put aside, despite the fact that the migration is caused in many ways by the free trade agreements and the economic policies dictated from Washington, I would say, and from the United States. This is very evident in Central America, how after CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, came into being, the migration from Central America started, and now Mexico, unfortunately, is doing the job to stop migration in Mexico, to stop migration to the United States.
In the case of those free trade agreements, and I remember that you and I have talked in the past, and you were telling me that are negotiated in secret. I mean, they're not reporting to their respective Congress, and there is no present in those tables of negotiation representatives of the unions and also the environment, especially groups. It did happen the same this time too?
It happened, yeah, again, it was only big business groups that participated in the negotiations or renegotiation of NAFTA. That is why the USMCA guarantees protections for corporations, but it does not guarantee to workers job security, living wages, good benefits, decent public services, and so on, as the United Electrical Workers have denounced here in the United States. So all the pressure from working people, environmentalists, family farmers, and others on the renegotiation of the USMCA did win, but very small significant victories. No, some labor provisions were improved, and a section that would have allowed pharmaceutical corporations to further expand their profits were scrapped. So there was some pressure put by groups, but in the end, most of the agreement is basically the previous NAFTA. It does not, as I said, really guarantee in any way that the working population will benefit, or that migrants also will benefit in any way.
Precisely, talking about NAFTA, it was necessary to finish NAFTA that was lasted 26 years, or this is another chapter of President Trump that he wants to put his stamp in everything, that, and he wanted to make sure that in history appears like he was the one who changed that agreement, and it changed even the name to make sure that represents his tenure at the government.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he can claim that this, as I said, that this is a very different agreement. It does provide certain benefits in the sense that Mexico has to respect labor rights in an increased way, and this would benefit eventually workers in the U.S., but it's a very long shot anyway. Some of the rules that benefit workers in Mexico were going to be put in place anyway by the government of Lopez Obrador, because that's one of the most important things of his political campaign, and the political base that Lopez Obrador has in Mexico is benefiting the working class and the labor sector. And so somehow it's kind of a travesty to say that this is because of the new NAFTA or because of Donald Trump's intentions. No, I think this was going to happen anyway. The progressiveness of the Mexican new government was going to make effective new labor improvements in Mexico. So all in all, I think in many ways it's a big mask that Donald Trump thinks that he's in any way radically changed the NAFTA into the new USMCA. I think it's basically the same agreement with the same objectives, which is more than anything, to benefit large corporations.
And in this case, we're talking was a first meeting between Lopez Obrador and Trump, and it was the first visit outside of Mexico of AMLO. The relations between the U.S. and Mexico, where are they? Are they same as it was, better, worse?
After the meeting?
After the meeting, how the relations in between the two countries are as of today? They improved, they went the same, or they got worse?
Well, I think the relation between the governments, between Trump's administration and Lopez Obrador administration, have definitely improved at some point. We don't know how long Trump will respect the pacts that were made during the visit, but it definitely helped the purpose to polish a little bit what was a rusty relation, right? So in one way, Donald Trump has been appeased but we will see how long it lasts, because we know his temperament is very volatile, to explain it in one way. But the real relation between countries, well, between the business sectors, might have been improved, of course, with the passage of the new NAFTA, the new free trade agreement. But the people that are affected by these agreements in both sides of the border will continue being simply affected. You know, the forced migration of workers now endangered by COVID-19 was a product of NAFTA, and it will not be abated. The crisis, the crisis of migration from Central America as well will continue. I think there was no mention about migration in the meeting of Lopez Obrador and Donald Trump, and as I said, this is very unfortunate, because political, I think it was very unfortunate that migration wasn't an issue. It was that it wasn't mentioned during the meeting between Lopez Obrador and Trump, because forced migration, is an effect of these failed economic policies that we have mentioned, economic policies that benefit only the trade and the investments of large corporations.
In the case of the Mexican reaction to the visit, the people who were liking it, they were mentioning, and they say that they saw it as a positive and well played. The critics say, and I quote, as an act of submission, subordination, and capitulation, and not diplomacy. Who were right or who were wrong?
Well, I'm afraid to say, no matter how supportive I am of the government of Lopez Obrador in many ways, above all his internal policies, his national priorities, I think in terms of foreign policy, this, in my way of saying, this was a faux pas, a failed tactic. I think that it will be, I hope it's not too short-lived, as I said, that it will continue appeasing Trump in his relation with Mexico. But we should not forget at the same time that the meeting was taking place, although in a very small way, but Trump is still trying to build a wall with Mexico. And also Mexican workers in the United States continue suffering very strong labor violations. It's not only labor violations that have been violated in Mexico, also all the farmers from Mexico are suffering a lot of violations here in the United States. So there's this double discourse about a good relation between the US and the Mexico government on one side, but on the other side, migrants on both sides of the border are suffering conditions that some, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, have called close to slavery in a recent report.
It was definitely a contradiction of words, what we have heard of AMLO before and what heard on that meeting with President Trump. Precisely in the press conference, President Lopez Obrador said, and I quote his words, "The forecasts failed. We didn't fight. We are friends, and we will continue to be friends." When he was a candidate in Mexico, he called the build of that wall between the two countries, he said, a monument of cruelty and hypocrisy. And he compared the anti-Mexican rhetoric of Donald Trump as the reminiscent of the Nazi Germany. So we're seeing two facets of the same person. How you read that? What looks like a clear contradiction of his position.
Well, I cannot read it in another way than the expression of the deep vulnerability, economic vulnerability that Mexico is under at this very moment. Mexico will be one of the most affected countries by the economic contraction provoked by the COVID pandemic, if not the most in Latin America. this is also because its relation and its dependence on the United States. So I think that it's very difficult to interpret it, but one way is that I think López Obrador has passed from idealism, from a position of ideals to a position of realism. And the realism is proving quite fatal in the case of Mexico. So I think that he has probably given up some of his idealistic positions in the United States and has to manage a situation of tremendous vulnerability in economic terms. Mexico remains dependent in its exports to the United States in a 90%. That has not changed. And also there are very deep financial troubles in the horizon. So I think that one of the tactics of López Obrador has been, since he took power, to try to have the best relation possible with the president of the most powerful country in the world, which happens to be the immediate neighbor of Mexico.
Manuel Pérez Rocha, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jorge.